Let's begin today by making a very basic observation about relationships, and that is they're not perfect. Sometimes you just make mistakes, or you misunderstand one another, or there are miscalculations, or sometimes you're just completely oblivious to what another person is saying or thinking or feeling. Sometimes you wind up arguing and using a tone of voice that really is not at all healthy and productive, and so you expose yourself as being someone who doesn't have it all together at all times. Now, as long as this is not an ongoing, abusive, and terrible kind of trend, I can live with the fact that imperfections are there. The way I look at it is you take two imperfect people and put them in a relationship, you're not going to have a perfect relationship. So healthy people acknowledge that, and they resolve among themselves to say, when our flaws, when our imperfections are shown, let's talk it out. Now, I wonder how many of you are interacting, though, with that narcissistic kind of person who not only does not talk it out in a very helpful or constructive way, they go straight into the making of lame excuses. And you know what I'm talking about. They just want to blame everybody else. I've actually jotted down 10 lame excuses that we often hear from narcissists. And by the way, you may be able to think of more beyond the list of 10 that I have. And if you want to, put them in the comment section. I'd like to see what you have. And I think our other listeners would like to hear from you as well. And then I want to talk about, why people do this in the first place. And as you have a much better understanding of this, then perhaps you can determine how not to get pulled into fruitless kind of interactions. For example, when you're dealing with a narcissist who's making an excuse, number one of their favorite excuses is, but I was right. Now, it doesn't matter if they were screaming or they were being very inappropriate or rude or rejecting. When you call them out, rather than saying, yeah, you got me on that and I need to improve, they still go back like a dog that just keeps going back to a bone. They just won't let it go. And it's like, well, I know you're asking for an apology, but I need you to acknowledge first how correct I am. And they get stuck on that because that's part of their need to be superior and in control, and they just don't receive input because those are defining features of narcissism. Or how about another lame excuse? And that is, you don't know what you're talking about. So you try to call them out on something, and even if it's glaringly obvious, it's like, no, I don't think you got it right. Because guess who's the keeper of correctness, kind of like the first lame excuse? Well, it's the narcissist. And so if you say, well, we need to do things better, it's like, nah, I don't know that I need to hear from you because you're never correct anyway. You don't know what you're talking about. Or how about a third lame excuse? And that is, well, if you had been more responsible, we wouldn't be in this mess in the first place. And so let's suppose that the narcissist is being loud and obnoxious or stubborn or harsh toward you, and you say something to the effect of, I don't want to interact with you if this is the way it's going to be. Instead of saying, I get it, what they'll say is, well, the whole reason we're at this place and the reason I did this because, these things wouldn't be happening if you weren't the person that you are. And again, they want to put it back onto you. Let's keep in mind, if they actually acknowledge they're wrong in their minds, they're putting themselves in a subordinate kind of position, and they can't do that. In addition, they live with a false self that they must maintain. They've constructed a persona that they want everybody to believe, and so when you call them out and say this is not good, they just can't deal with it because their ego is very weak and very damaged. So to say that they make mistakes, they can't do it, so they just push it back and blame it on you. Or how about a fourth lame excuse, and that is, hey, that's just the way I am, or I'm just being real. This is me. Deal with it. And so rather than even sidestepping it, it's like, yeah, if I yelled at you, that's the way I am. Anybody ought to understand that. When I do it, it's okay. Or maybe a fifth lame excuse that a narcissist might make, and that is, I just am the kind of person that's going to tell it like it is. Or I don't pull any punches, or I'm just a straight shooter. And I'm all for telling it like it is, And I'm all for being a straight shooter, but that's not what they're really meaning. What they're saying is, if I feel like saying something, I'll just say it. If you don't like it, that's tough. And it actually is their way of indicating that they have a very low level of empathy. I don't care how you're reacting to me. I don't care how it makes you feel. I don't care how I make you feel. And that's just the way they engage with you. Or how about another one? Well, if you're just looking for sympathy, you're not going to find it here. So let's suppose that there's been a miscalculation, a blunder, and all of that, and you let them know, hey, this is not working out well for me. Then they can come up with the, do I have to just play my violin for you, you poor, pitiful you? And they kind of go into a sarcastic mode and a harshness. It's their way of saying, again, your feelings mean nothing to me. Or a seventh lame excuse, and that is, these kinds of problems never happened to me before you came along. And the implication is my life as I do it, well, it's pretty close to ideal, and the only thing that's not ideal in my life is you. So if I do something that's wrong, well, you're going to have to do some soul searching to figure out why you made my life miserable. That's the way their twisted thinking can play out. Or how about another one? Sometimes when there's been some real bad behavior on that person's part, they can actually say, I'm actually the victim here. I've actually known some folks who have been really angry and harsh and mean-spirited in the way that they have responded to someone. And when you call them out, it's like, okay, you know what? Maybe I did have a bad episode there, but look what you did to me. And so they play the victim card. I've actually known men who have been on the giving end of domestic abuse, and then when they're called out, it's like, well, you don't know what it's like living with this person that I have to live with. And so they like to play that victim card. Or another lame excuse, and that is, you were just asking for trouble anyway. And so once again, rather than taking responsibility, then they just put it back on you. And then, how about this one? And this is a real common one, a lame excuse. Stuff happens. Actually, sometimes they don't say it quite that politely. Stuff happens, so deal with it. And they don't acknowledge that there's a problem from what they, in the way they've treated you. It's just like, yeah, when you hang around with me, sometimes you get crummy stuff, and you're just going to have to learn how to deal with it. That's just the way it is. Now, listening to those lame excuses, I can imagine that many of you are thinking, oh, I hear that kind of stuff all the time. And you ask, why do people like that narcissist go into this high excuse giving kind of mode? Well, there are several thoughts here. First and foremost, they don't want to be held responsible for their humanity, for their mistakes. It implies that they, in fact, are deficient. And that's a very scary thought for them to say. They can say something very broad like, I know I'm not perfect. I mean, how many times have you heard stuff like that? And then comes the next word, but then they throw it back on you. They don't want to have to admit their deficiencies and their mistakes, because that's just something that's very difficult for them. See, let's pick up on another thought, which is a very close alliance to this, and that is, narcissistic people tend to be very shame-based in the way that they think. They were probably exposed to a great deal of shame in their earlier years. They learned that when things didn't go well, then you were to be mistreated or spoken to in an awful kind of way. And so they learn how to give out shame as they age. And so if you call them out and say, you've blundered, then many times in their mind, they're already thinking, well, so you're trying to put shame on me, right? And to say that you made a mistake is not the same thing as saying I'm trying to put shame on you. I'm just saying you made a mistake. Let's talk about it. But their way of thinking is so clouded by that shameful type of history that they don't know how to objectively approach mistakes and miscalculations. Or another reason that people go into the blame mode is they don't want to be seen as being a loser. Whenever you show your humanity, you miscalculate or you misunderstand, or you just didn't read a situation very well and you respond poorly, to presume that you will say, yes, that indeed is the case, Well, in their mind, it means, yeah, and you're asking me to say that I'm a loser, and I'm not about to, because you're the loser in this. They have to stay in the superior position. And so because of that, then they simply cannot discuss what's obvious to everyone else. Or how about another explanation, and that is narcissistic kind of people tend to be rather lazy in the way that they manage emotions. You know, the bottom line is whenever you have relational or emotional issues, it requires some work to get through them. It requires that you slow down and think things through in a very careful kind of way. And rather than the narcissist saying, I wonder what that means, or I wonder what I can learn about this, which requires a certain kind of mental exercise and work, it's like, nah, I'm not going to do that. It's your fault. End of discussion. So basically, you can see that when the narcissist goes into that lame excuse-making mindset, they're revealing a great deal of emptiness on the inside. They're presuming that to show and to discuss their humanity means that they're being graded in a very low kind of way, and their mind simply is not able to manage that. You know, interestingly, the way I like to look at these kind of things is you can tell more about a person, not necessarily by the mistakes they make, but by the way they respond in the aftermath of the mistakes. And so I'm hoping that as you hear these kinds of excuses, rather than making it your task to put that narcissist in a straightened up kind of mode, because it's not going to happen, you can at least see what's going on, and you can separate yourself off from very unhealthy or detrimental kinds of discussions that are going to do nothing but dig the hole even deeper. So learn how to detach, learn how to unhook, and whatever you need to do, you don't need to just try to convince somebody of something they just absolutely don't want to be convinced of. So this is why so many folks just finally decide, you know, if I'm living with somebody who's this way perpetually, I'm going to have to keep a very minimal level of expectations for where this relationship is going to go. Now, I hope that you find these videos helpful, and I would encourage that as you do find it helpful, that you would go down below the video here and punch the subscribe button. We'd love to have you on board with us. And also below, you'll notice that I have books and other kinds of things there that would be resources that I hope that you can make good use of. Glad to have you on board with the Surviving Narcissism Network.